Hello and welcome to the History Help channel. I'm Usha, who is going to take you through the subject Historical Method and Historiography. So, we are studying Historical Method and Historiography in four sections. The first is history, next is research, next is historiography, and finally, Indian historiography. So in this slideshow, we will be learning about history section. In the previous slideshow, we learnt about meanings and definitions of history. In this slideshow, we will be learning about nature and scope of history. So let us take a deeper look into this. So nature of history. There are a lot of points in nature of history. The nature of history is very complex. So there are a lot of historians and scholars who have given various quotes about nature of history. So one of the first statement is history is repetitive. Now, when we say history is repetitive, what we mean by saying history is repetitive is that things happen. Like, for example, wars, battles, dynasties coming and going, kings coming and going, all this is repetitive. So, what may have happened in 4th century may be still happening in the 20th century or in the 19th century. So revolutions have taken place, wars have taken place, even peace has taken place. So in that way, history is repetitive. But some scholars say history is not repetitive. See, history is only unique things. How can history be repetitive? The same things keep happening, there is no history, right? So some scholars say history is not repetitive. So when that is also true. See, for example, not every war will lead to peace, or not every war will have the same kind of government. Sometimes you have democracy after a war, sometimes you may have a despotic rule. For example, during the French Revolution, Napoleon's rule came. That was a military despotic rule. But when in America, the same American Revolution happened, and after the war, after the revolution and their fight, it slowly went on to become a federal government. So history is not repetitive also. So one of the scholars named Trevelyan says that history is both repetitive and history is not repetitive. What he is trying to say is same things will not happen. What happened yesterday will not happen today. Okay, but similar things will happen. In other words, there will be wars, but there is a difference in wars. For example, the World War One, how it was fought, was totally different from the way World War Two was fought. Nuclear weapons and atom bomb was used in the World War Two, which was not there during the time of World War One. So same things do not happen. So, but similar things will happen. That is what is the nature of history. Now take a look into the second point. History is concerned with man in time. This means that history is just a record of events, right? But all the events are with respect to a particular time period. We may be narrating history of 19th century or 20th century, or we may be telling about a certain dynasty rule. So it's all with respect to time. So third point is history is concerned with man in space. This means whenever you tell about a past event, you connect it to a location, physical and geographical location. So if I'm talking about Mughal times, I may be talking about India, and I might also be talking about the northern part of the country where Mughal rule was dominant, or I might be talking about Deccan where Aurangzeb had come in. So history is always concerned with space also. The fourth nature of history is influenced by country. How is this possible? If you look into India or Greece or Rome or Christian historiography or Arab, it is influenced by country. See, if you ask a Greek to write a history, or if you see the Greek historians who wrote history, you will see that it's very logical. They talk about facts, they talk about reasoning, they talk about this happened because of this. They use a lot of science, logic, and reasoning in Greek history. At the same way, if you look at the Roman history, it's all political. You will have kings, you will have dynasties. They only talk about the important kings and their period and what happened during that time, the wars fought, the battles fought, what the administration was. So it was more to do with politics and the kings. Similarly, if you look into Christian historiography, Christians were more interested in putting up church as the center of all things. So, history was influenced by country too. What about time period? It was influenced by time period also. See how uh, when British came to the country and when they wrote history, it was with a different way of looking into things. They may have boasted about the company's conquest, the company's situations, how they dealt with it, and all. But after the English went away, after the independence, whatever happened was the Indian historians and how they looked into the country's history is totally different. So this history is definitely, and they didn't want anything to do with the Indian historians did not want to do anything with the British perspective on history. So rather than saying British, I would say the English perspective on history or the company's perspective on history. The fifth point is history is objective. History tries to place facts before you. It is not biased. It is not supposed to be biased. If I write about the time frame of Aurangzeb, I am supposed to stick to facts, not praise Aurangzeb, not criticize Aurangzeb. I must write it in very objective way. That is what makes history a scientific field. Okay, so that is also a nature of history. History is also analysis. That is the sixth point. What do you mean by analysis? You see, it's not just talking about events. What happened in Greece or what happened in Rome, what happened in the freedom movement. That is just narration. How it happened, why it happened, all that analysis part is also very important. Now, Gandhi's policies of Quit India movement happened, but it failed also. Similarly, his non-cooperation also failed. What happened? Why it happened? Could it have been avoided? All these also need to be discussed in history. So, history is just not narration, it is also analysis, it is also a part of history. Next, all history is contemporary. What do you mean by this? Contemporary means modern. So, when we say all history is modern, what do you mean by that? History is past, how can it be modern? So, this is where things get interesting. If you are a historian and you are writing about history, you may be writing about things in the past, but you are sitting in the present and writing, no? So I might talk about Chanakya, I might talk about Chandragupta Maurya, but I am sitting here now in the present and I am writing history. So everything whatever you write will be with respect to modern times. So for example, after the Kalinga War, Ashoka was filled with remorse. What was going through his mind? Nobody knows. We may make a guess. As a historian, I might say he may be undergoing guilt. So I'll write on based on my perspective, or I'll take up records, primary and secondary records, which try to prove this point. So in that way, in that sense, history is contemporary. Also, if you look into certain things like be it the policies, rules, regulations, or even things like agriculture, the new technologies, what was there? Agriculture, for example, what was there in the past? It is there even today. So, all history is contemporary in this sense. One more point next to that is history is dialogue between past and present. That you have seen, right? See, what happens is suppose when I'm writing the same example I'll take. When I'm writing about Ashoka, there are a lot of gaps. What was going on in his mind? It might be fear, it might be guilt, it may be sadness. So there are gaps here. I do not know the complete truth. So what I, as a historian, will start asking questions. Know how Ashoka might have felt after the war. Oh, okay. He told that after the war he is going to give up war. He'll only focus on Dhamma or Buddhism, Buddhist spreading of Buddhism. So what might have gone through his mind? So I'm going on asking questions. Why am I asking questions? To understand and to fill up the gaps, what is not known. So there is a dialogue between now and between the past. And that's how I write history. So that is why E.H. Carr, a historian, says history is a dialogue. Coming to the next point, history is linear. So some people say that the historical forces are linear. That means from the past it comes to the present, and then it goes to the future. Everything is a straight line. Okay. While some of them say that history is cyclic. It starts from a point, goes to has an upward peak, reaches the highest point, comes down again like a sine cos wave, and then disappears. For example, civilization. There are a lot of civilization like Egyptian or even the Mesopotamian. All these civilizations would have disappeared over time. So it's cyclic. So there is birth, growth, decay. So some believe that. Some scholars believe that history is only progress. There is no linear, there is no cyclic. Whatever happens is progress. From the prehistoric man to if you compare today. So there has only been progress. So that is also a nature of history. Final 3 points we will talk about. History is comprehensive. Of course, history is comprehensive. It has a lot of branches in it. It's just not politics. It is just not literature. It is not just not art. It is just not inventions. It is just not about classes. It's not just about society. It is comprehensive. It includes everything. History can predict future. What do you mean by this? Can it predict future? Of course. So in certain cases it can. For example, if you are talking about elections in the country, we more often know, depending on the demography of the country, the age group, and the political parties involved in that particular state, how which party is going to win. So that it's a kind of we are predicting the future, looking into its past. Similarly, if you look into the past events, like for example Hitler's attitude, Winston Churchill, the statesman from United this one England, mentions that um, Germans under Hitler will be disastrous, and that turned out to be true. So history can predict future in that sense. And the last but the most important point is value judgments are part of history. See, some scholars like Ranke say that history is not supposed to offer any kind of judgment. It is supposed to narrate things as it happened. So there is no, object, this one, there is no bias, there is no saying this is going to happen, this is good, this is bad. But Lord Acton says value judgments should be part of history. What do you mean by value judgments? It means you are saying you do this, things will happen good. You do this, you are going to end up in disaster. That is good and evil. The difference between good and evil can be a part of history. History has lot of stories, and each story has a moral. So obviously, value judgments can be based on these morals. Otherwise, history will be very dry, right? If you're just narrating things, history is going to be very dry. If you want to make it interesting, you should include. See, this is what happened, and perhaps this is why it took place like this. So that is what is the nature of history. So to sum up, I can say history is repetitive, history is not repetitive, history is contemporary, history is dialogue, history can predict future, value judgment should be part of history, history can be linear, cyclic, and progressive, but history is comprehensive. So we can figure out that nature of history is very vast and complex. Now coming to the final topic, that is the scope of history. So the first point is history is comprehensive. That is true. History is comprehensive. It has history of science, history of physics, history of biology, history of chemistry, history of arts. So history is very independent. It is not a part of politics alone. It's not a part of literature alone. History is very big. It can include all the branches of other sciences also. Second point is it includes all the activities of man. The scope means what? I forgot to mention. What is the scope of history? Means what does history include? Okay, so history includes almost everything, and history is comprehensive. Second point is all activities of man. What does it mean? Man's social activities. man's political activities, man's intellectual activity, his inventions, his discoveries, his art, everything is included in the scope of history. After all, history is man's business. Understanding the man's business by man, when written by man, right? So it's all activities of man. Third is common man comes under the scope of history. Now, Carlyle, a famous historian, says history is only the biography of great men. So, if I take Napoleon, I'll write everything about Napoleon, his wars, his childhood, his birth, his attitudes. That's history. I might write about Hitler, or I might write about Roman leaders, I might write about Greek leaders. But that is not history, right? History means everything. So even common man comes under the scope of history. Why? Because common man is the one who has toiled, who has suffered, who has undergone pain, who has built buildings, who has constructed Taj Mahal, who has done the Egyptian tomb. So even common man is also a very important part he plays in the scope of history. The fourth point is history is ever expanding. That is true. See, in the 19th century, history was only with respect to a particular country. It could be England or France or Spain and all. But gradually, it started incorporating the history of other countries like Africa, India, and all. Also, in the 20th century, social and economics also came into picture. Communism took place, so there was a lot of focus on class struggles, trade, how the society lives, how the labor class can cost revenue or rewards, how capitalism is. So all economics also came into picture. Also social changes like how man lives in society, what is the caste, how caste affects, how it can bring about revolutions. So all economics and social also took part in history. So history grew, history became universal. So that is what I meant by history is ever expanding. What about nature and history? See, nature doesn't come in history, okay? But if nature's activities change man, then there is history. Change society, then there is history. For example, if you see Panipat or Waterloo, Panipat has figured in all our Mughal history textbook, this one textbooks. So the location has mattered. There is a river flowing. If the river flows and it changes the people's activities, the society's activities, then there is history. Only if one river is flowing, like Ganga is flowing, then there is no history. But suppose Ganga flows into certain different direction or it disappears, what happens to the society, what happens to the people living around them? That is history. So nature is also part of history if it affects man's this one. Finally, economics and social change. That is also a part of history that I have already explained. So, history has grown from being a small, limited in scope to a very vast, comprehensive subject. So, in the next slide, we will look into the dependency of history with other branches, okay, and how they are also dependent on history. Thank you and keep subscribing to this channel.